nonprofit leaders that we'll have on in the future who are also doing incredibly exciting and important work in the community. And so just want to highlight and welcome Kathy Roth-Duquette, who's the founder and CEO of Blue Star Families, Megan Everett, who runs the veteran programs on behalf of McCormick Foundation, which is a significant foundation putting out grants to support the work of veteran organizations. Mike Irwin, who's the founder of Team RWB, a great chapter-based national organization that's got veterans coming together previously in person. We'll talk about what it looks like today to sort of build community and find support and make a contribution back. And Anne-Marie Craig, who runs the Commit Foundation, an organization that she started to help in the transition of service members. And she's done some very sophisticated things to help make that transition a little bit easier. So these are folks that I admire who I think are doing interesting things. And we just want to have a conversation today about what's it like leading an organization amidst this environment? What's it like being a not-for-profit that relies on donor dollars to keep the mission moving? And what have you done to sort of pivot? All of you do things that are, including Bunker Labs, that are really hinged on people being together in person. And so how are we evolving our models? So that's sort of the purpose of today's conversation. The chat is open. If you have questions, please send them to us, and we'll take them as we can. But let's jump in. Kathy, if I can start with you, tell us what's going on. What Blue Star Families? How have you? What are you doing to meet the moment?
Yeah, we've really changed our whole organization to respond to the COVID pandemic, but in many ways, we haven't changed it. It just took a different expression because Blue Star Families' mission was always to take the experience that military families had, military connected people, active duty guard, reserve, transitioning service members and their families, see what the challenges were and figure out how do you meet the challenges in ways that people want for you. And so that is something you have to respond to in real time. That's different on 9/11 than it is in 2005 and than it is in 2015. So we were always kind of pulsing, getting data, doing our surveys, finding out what's going on the ground, listening, sharing the information we had, partnering with other people to figure out what the right solutions were and acting on those solutions. So when this time came, it wasn't that hard for us to pivot to what we were hearing. If you're listening, you're hearing, here's the challenge, or to know we have to ask questions differently now so that we hear what's going on, share with a different set of people, partner maybe with the same partners, but in different ways, but definitely act differently. The first thing we did was to, we're kind of known for our polls, for our annual military family lifestyle survey, but to get that data from the community, we put together a pain point poll that we could get out to find out what are active duty, guard and reserve, and veterans and their families experiencing right now because of COVID. What are the pain points and are there solutions to it? We put together a coalition. We'd been doing a lot of collaborative work before because we knew we could never meet the needs of our families without collaborating. So we had these pre-existing collaborative relationships, a lot of time and energy we'd invested in that. And then grassroots and grass tops with military leadership and local people to be able to translate that information we heard. And we launched an initiative with something called the Association for Defense Communities, which are civilian organizations around military installations, to put on town hall meetings twice a week, put out this pain poll once a week, collaborate with other folks who are doing work in this area, try to provide information useful to the community, and at the same time, identify solutions that might be good for some of these problems we're finding. So that was a big answer. Sorry for taking so much time, but we call that our COVID-19 Military Support Initiative, and we invite all of your viewers to join in on it.
It's great. No, thanks, Kathy. And again, seeing those announcements come through is awesome. I can attest to sort of the forward-facing and aggressive pivot that you've made. I do think when we talk to entrepreneurs, one of the things that we say is, those that have the closest proximity to their customers will be on the other side of this. And so it really is a moment to sort of stay close to your customers, which is what you've been doing through data and surveys. Mike, let's go to you. What's happening on the ground for Team RWB and what are you guys doing to meet the moment?
Yeah, first of all, it's so crazy when you stop and think about just how much the world has changed in this past month or so. So our organization, our mission really is to enrich veterans' lives. And we've done that primarily for the first 9.5 years of our existence by helping them to connect with new members of their community and to stay physically active. And so as you think about now, like, well, you can't necessarily do that in person still for, it looks like, at least a couple more weeks. But even still, those are going to be a lot of people, I think, who are going to slow roll getting back to what normal used to be for a while, probably until there's a vaccine, or at least for the rest of 2020. So it's about for us, it's about the virtual community that we're able to be able to create. So since the beginning, we've created Facebook groups for our chapters. So there's about 250 different private Facebook groups across that platform, where a lot of our members connect with each other, interact, etc. And so about 15 months ago, we launched the process of designing and building an app. We know that so much of people's experience today is mobile, especially the younger generation of veterans coming out from ETS and retiring at age 22 to 30 years old, and they live through mobile. So we've got an app. 1.0 is out right now. It's good. You can discover events and virtual challenges. 2.0 is coming out next month, which is going to be a game changer because it's going to make it much stickier and social. But for the meantime, right now, we've got a series of ongoing virtual challenges, Todd, that we're doing right now. We got what's called the Quarantine Crusher Challenge. Tomorrow, I'm actually throwing down and challenging everybody to train up for Memorial Day Murph, which is, if you know that, like, you know how epic it is, but it's a 1 mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats, and then 1 mile on the back end. So we're trying to really mobilize people and veterans across our organization by challenging them with big ideas and big goals that they can work towards, and doing so through the process of our app and through the virtual community.
That's great. What is the Quarantine Crusher? I have to ask.
So there's a series. We got the shirt coming out too. A bunch of people want the shirt, but it's a series of basically suggested exercises throughout the given day. But the goal really is for 31 straight days, move your body, get out there, and it can be a walk or a run or a hike. It can be burpees and push-ups and all kinds of stuff. But it's not too prescriptive. It gives a lot of the power into the individual person's hands to choose. But the goal is like, hey, you got to get out there and just move your body. Staying inside and staying on the couch or whatever for too long is, we know, problematic. So get outside and just move.
Awesome. And such an important message. Something I'm encouraging probably more than I'm doing these days, if I'm being honest, but that's awesome. I'm going to look at that and probably sign up. So count me in. Thanks, Mike. Anne-Marie, the Commit Foundation and the work that you do with transitioning veterans, a lot of what you do is convene really powerful and in-person kind of workshops. How are you meeting the moment, and what's Commit doing to sort of speak to transition?
Thanks, Todd. The Commit Foundation at this time, we were uniquely poised to serve. In 2017, the Clark family out of Washington, D.C. challenged Commit to scale. And so starting in 2018, we began thinking about scale through technology. Commit took its 2-day workshop into an online program and platform. We built a piece of software called PIP, Pursue Your Purpose, and we complemented that with a digital library. So Commit has a 12-module program that we piloted, betaed, and fully launched in 2019. We are seeing 100% completion. It's 12 modules built around the Designing Your Life curriculum out of Stanford, where we take veterans through their strengths, their values, what an ideal day is, both personally, professionally, and really get them in the right headspace to make decisions about their career. And that complemented by our digital library, which is over 700 interviews right now with our mentors, where veterans can explore industries and functions. So, I don't want to say it's been business as usual, because I don't think that's fair in today's environment, but we were uniquely poised to continue our services. Q1 was our strongest quarter to date. We had 340 veterans sign up for our services in Q1, and we were able to deliver 700 services to those men and women. The team is actually delivering our first virtual workshop as we speak. It started Tuesday night. It was supposed to be in Dallas, but we were able to pivot and deliver that online. And so things have been going really well. I think for a lot of folks, fundraising is something that's top of mind because it's a difficult environment when people are scared about going to the grocery store. But for the most part, we have been chugging along and really able to continue delivery.
Awesome. Thanks, Anne Marie. So speaking of funding, let's, Megan, I want to go to you. Can you speak from a foundation perspective a little bit about, I think people, particularly those that are starting not-for-profits, always kind of wonder how foundations go about doing their work, but can you maybe give us some insights into what's changed from your position running the Veterans Program at McCormick Foundation and how you guys are reacting to kind of meet the moment?
Sure. Of course, like most people, we were a very, well, not everybody actually on the call, because a lot of people do work remotely. I know RWB does, Blue Star Families, they have people all over the country. We were a very in-office culture. So I think that was our first major adjustment, was figuring that piece out of how we can work at home and still be effective and reach out to our partners. We also realized quickly too that it wasn't, at first we wanted to kind of operate as business as usual, but that this is not business as usual at all. What everybody's facing, whether it be our partners who are frontline workers or people that we fund that deal in the mental health space, everybody has to adjust to this. And we need to be very, very on the ground as much as we can with our partners and reaching out and seeing how this is affecting them directly. So I think our first reaction was to do that reach out and say, hey, as many people are saying, we're in this together. We understand that this is going to totally shift your funding kind of abilities, or fundraising abilities, I should say. And so please, let's have open dialogue and be able to talk about what this looks like for you all. This isn't a time to kind of hide things or not really tell us what's happening on the ground, because we want to be flexible. Whether it be extending deadlines, whether it be changing a programmatic grant to a general operating grant, and really truly listen to our partners and figure out what's going on together. I do want to give a plug to what Kathy's doing. What we learn on those calls, the Monday calls and then your town halls, is we bring directly back to our leadership to understand really what's happening nationally, and then how we can apply that to what's happening here in Chicago and Illinois. I mean, I really didn't think about the full workforce aspect of this and the long-term effect that it's going to have on transitioning service members really till Kathy and the Blue Star Family group started talking about it. So it's really trying to be collaborative, work with our partners, learn from each other, because we aren't good at our job unless we know, unless we're hearing from our partners to understand and how to react.
That's great. Thanks, Megan. So I want to ask, I'll open this up to the service providers, and then I want to get your perspective on it, Megan. But what in your view has changed permanently, and what in your view will, in some ways, kind of revert back to what at some point was normal? What amidst these reactions and everyone, the three of you in particular, doing agile things to sort of pivot and meet the moment, what do you think will become the new normal, and where do you expect a return to what we were doing previously?
For our organizations or for the world? Do you think?
I think, well, that's great. I'd say I would love your organizational perspective, but maybe if you have a commentary on the world as well, let's hear it.
I mean, I think if I can kick off, I mean, for our organization, I think it's really an opportunity for us to speed up being the organization we want to be. So I see a real upside for us. We started, I think like many of the groups here, we started from nothing. We were 6 people who volunteered that first year with no budget and no pay. And we incrementally grew up, and we're about a $6.5 million organization now, 45 people, 11 chapters in 11 different states, but we are, our ideally would be 50 in 50 states. So we're on a trajectory, and we're not yet what we want to be. We have never been what we want to be, but we see where we're going. And in some ways, this forces us to get closer to our members, to really make sure we're providing them value, and to, we're in the middle of a digital transformation. We're a little bit behind Team Red, White, and Blue. I just downloaded your app, Mike, and signed up. We're in the beginning of creating one of those, but we need to make it really easy for people to get help from us. to get connected. Our motto is to support military families in ways that strengthen communities. So this really challenges us to provide value in real time on a heightened level that I hope makes us tighter and better at what we do it and measure it more and, get there. So I think for us, that's the upside of it. And if we do a good job, then we'll create a relationship that will, keep us going forward with this. I also think that this takes, and I thank you, Megan, for your good words. I think this is allowing us to take collaboration with other organizations and the government farther. We're getting some policy changes. We got literally a policy change around child development centers in 5 days. From the time we identified a problem to the time we got the problem resolved, through having someone on one of our town halls and then getting the Secretary of Defense person to change it with the Army. No one has ever seen change that fast. But once we get those wheels going because of this time of urgency, maybe we can keep relationships up that will let us be that functional. So that's the hopeful side to me.
That's great. Anne-Marie, maybe let's go to you next. What's your forecast on what will stick as the new normal for your organization or for the world, and what might, we see to go back?
Yeah, for the space, I would argue, I feel like just in general, folks are having a lot more grace with one another. And I think that's something we need in our lives. And it's been this grace that's been mandated by conditions, but it's something that we should stick with, right? We all need a little bit more grace. Certainly partnership, and Kathy hit on that. It's the first place my head went. We happen to have built a beautiful product, but we're a small organization. We served about a little over 700 people last year. Our goal is to serve over 1,000 this year. And so my immediate reaction was, who can I reach out to that could benefit from our platform? If all of a sudden someone can't do a race that they were going to do or do a service project they were going to do, is there a way to get them onto our platform so we can serve their constituents? So I hope that the partnership sticks, and the grace. And, I think we, over the past 72 hours, have been really pleased with our virtual workshops. So I'll be curious to see if we decide to do more of those. We are known for creating these intimate environments where quality dialogue happens, and we've been able to replicate that virtually. And so that's been a huge, sign of things that we could potentially change in the future, where we're doing more things virtually. And certainly that keeps costs down because we're not flying people around. So hoping that the grace and the partnership continues on our end.
I think it's great. And it's an open question around travel, which maybe we'll talk about in a little bit. But Mike, what are you seeing, and what do you think is the new normal?
Yeah, staying on the partnership piece, we've got a pretty awesome one coming out pretty soon. It hasn't been announced yet, so maybe I'm premature. But we're partnering with Wear Blue, Run to Remember, around Memorial Day. And so we're going to be encouraging all of our veterans to join, and because we can't do it in person, but we can do it virtually, and encouraging all of our members to sign up and to run that day on Monday, Memorial Day, in honor of someone who's been killed in action. And each person will get like the name and the face and the story of someone who was killed in action. So that's just one example of the partnerships that, both Kathy and Marie just both talked about. For me, I think that my big curiosity centers around right now, what is the balance, or is there an ideal ratio for the blend of in-person and virtual? So, everyone's been kind of sort of tinkering with, when you think about in the veteran space, most of our organizations are founded between 2008, 2000 and Bunker Labs is what, 2013?
2014. Yeah.
2014. And so some of the organizations have been founded really in the past 10 years or less. Now, the analogy I use is a lot of us are like teenagers, we're no longer new and cute, and everyone wants to hold you and say how awesome you are. But then you also don't have the systems and the processes in place to be around for 50 years or 100 years. And so we're all, I won't speak for all of us, I'll speak for our organization. We're in this process of trying to figure out what that looks like. And bring it back to this question about virtual versus in person, right? Some organizations thrive around, and they really are driven by the in-person aspect. But is there a ratio that emerges that's hey, you can do 80% of your stuff virtually, but 20% has got to be in person still? Or what does that blend look like? And I think we have to actually apply almost some algorithms and some attempts to measure it quantitatively so we can figure out how to make decisions. Because like for Team Red, White, and Blue, like we can't go all virtual, right? If we're an all virtual community, there's others that are already doing the all virtual thing, and that's not what we want to do. But we also have already been forced to. But even before COVID, back last fall when we launched the app, part of the vision starting 18 months ago was we've got to start to connect in a virtual way to make it more convenient, because guess what? People are busy. They got a lot of things going on. And because of that, we've got to be able to challenge them and to build community virtually. So I think that is where my mind goes. That I don't know where it levels out, Todd, but I think that we've got to apply a lot of attention and focus on that specific question over the next 6 to 12 months, because that will help to inform decision-making that we as leaders have to make about where resources are best spent and where we can have the biggest impact on veterans' lives.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and Megan, what's your perspective? So from a funder's perspective, foundations are being forced to sort of be reactive to the moment. Again, everyone, this is the thing, getting closer to their customers. You're doing that for the organizations, including Bunker Labs and others that you support. What do you think will change permanently from the foundation side going forward?
Well, I think that there's a recognition when you get pushed out of kind of your normal comfort zone and grant cycles and reporting that, sometimes all that doesn't matter as much. It's very important to obviously do your due diligence and have partnerships with organizations, but that are strong and built off of trust. But in the big picture, when people are suffering and hurting and things like this are happening across the country, that, responding quickly is very, very important. But then also, what is this going to look like in the long term, and how is it going to inform our funding? What will happen? What happens when people can't have in-person events to do their fundraisers? How do foundations react to that? Is this a time where, you give big because of the emergency, more so in a way that you wouldn't consider when things are normal? So we are really trying to react and be responsive to what's happening on the ground, but then really starting to shift what this does look like in the long term. And I don't think we have all the answers yet, because there are so many unknowns. But we know in 6-12 months, when these fundraisers don't happen, it's hard to build relationships with funders virtually, or how is that going to shift? You don't have you don't have a relationship with them already, and how we can kind of come together as foundations to really support the nonprofits that are doing the good work. So there's a lot of talk in the foundation world of what the long term is going to look like, and like many, I don't think we've are quite there yet, but we're definitely thinking about it.
Yeah. Just one follow-on question for you, Megan. And again, I don't know if you have a perspective, but because for a lot of nonprofits, like the big gala is the mechanism for individual donor giving to an organization. We do some of that. It's not, I'd say, a cornerstone of our fundraising strategy, but or maybe for anybody, I just wonder, and I don't know if you have a perspective, like, do we get back to a place of big events and galas as a fundraising mechanism, or do we think that something will change as it relates to that for nonprofit organizations?
And it'll be great to hear from the VSOs too. But it's not going to happen, I don't think, in the next year. So I think in a way too, I think it will help get organizations get creative on how they fundraise, and that this isn't a given. So I think there's going to have to be a shift, but it needs to be in partnership together with funders and VSOs, and seeing where other sources of revenue come in for these organizations.
That's great. Well, we have some questions coming in, which is great. Marie asked a question, which I think is fantastic, which is the reality, which is coronavirus is disproportionately affecting underserved populations. Chicago, where my hometown, it's particularly hitting Black and brown communities, and we know that sort of economic disparities are exacerbated amidst this global pandemic. So what are your organizations doing specifically to support more vulnerable veteran populations and their families? I'll open that up for Mike, Kathy, or Anne-Marie to start us off.
Yeah, I mean, just from our angle, a big part of our focus as an organization, right, is that we are open to all veterans and beyond, right? So 30% of our members, have not, worn the uniform. They often are either married to or related to or know someone who's served, and so for us, it's always about getting the word out, as far as possible that, that we are here and exist to support veterans, and so unfortunately at this time, like, we're not really able to reach people who have not already signed up and joined our organization. And so that's where, we're encouraging people to let them know about what we're about and what we stand to do. But in that regard, we are, a little less agile or flexible than we'd like to be. But, we are certainly there. And so any help and assistance, letting, anyone from underserved communities and people who are disproportionately struggling, Team Red, White, and Blue is there to support in the same way and have that sense of community that that we all crave so much from our time in the military.
Yeah, I'll offer a thought from Bunker Lab's perspective, which is the small business devastation is pronounced, and I think there's going to be a lot of people that find themselves maybe pursuing entrepreneurship as a vehicle of last resort towards economic sustainability, and not to sort of build the next Facebook, but rather to hang a shingle or do something that can produce some form of economic income where traditional jobs may be unavailable. So we're very tuned into this challenge on the ground of folks that are going to be forced into creative gig economy solutions for themselves because of the challenges that they're facing economically. I don't know, Kathy, Anne-Marie, do you want to maybe comment on this as well?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, one of the things we're excited about with our pain point poll that we're doing on a weekly basis is we're identifying places where there is real vulnerability. So we can see that we've got 8% of folks don't have enough money to buy groceries next week right now. Our pain point poll is done by zip code. So we can actually identify where there are bigger areas of need so we can try to direct help there. We're also able to see where there's been, disproportionate unemployment or other kinds of real distress. And where people, we saw 21% of people saying that they're planning in the next week using their credit cards or spending, going into debt in order to just pay their regular expenses. We're also asking people now with the pain point poll to identify themselves if they're having a problem that they'd like to solve. And so we're actually going to go and triage the solution for people to identify those. Todd, I would love it if you would push out through your channels that pain point poll, and if folks on this call would encourage other people to take it, because I think that's a way for us to try to in real time address as much as we can in this community. It is aimed at veterans as well as currently serving Guard and Reserve. And I want to mention too, the Guard and Reserve, one of the questions we ask on that poll is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you doing? And we look at active duty, Guard and Reserve, veterans, and the Guard and Reserve are the ones who are having the biggest challenge right now of all of those communities. So that's another place we need to direct some thought.
Mm-hmm. In fact, many of those folks are serving sort of on the front lines of sort of healthcare augmentation and support. Anne-Marie, just your thoughts on sort of how do we reach and support and serve disproportionately underserved communities this time?
Yeah, I think just like Mike said, pushing out our resources to people to make sure that communities are aware that we're here. And Kathy and her team's data gathering is so helpful because it can help us target where we market our services. If someone applies for commit services online, they're contacted by one of our LCSWs or career counselors within 24 hours. We do executive coaching at no cost for men and women coming through our programs, and all of that's already done virtually. So our ability to understand where the needs are and get to them is so helpful with the data that Blue Star and everyone else. And I know that Wounded Warrior Project and there are a handful of other great organizations out there really pushing their resources to the front line. One thing, I think there's so much that the veteran community can do for America right now. We've already normalized the conversation around mental health, particularly over the past 5 years. And so it would be wonderful if all of us could come together and really share those lessons learned with the rest of the country. Because we're all experiencing, we're all working every corner of our brain in so many different ways, and we're experiencing so many emotions. And I do think that there is a progression that we have made, again, particularly over the past 5 years around normalizing mental health. And it would be great if we could get more of that into the hands of America.
It's great. In some ways, that's not a new conversation for our community. So there's a role that we can play. Megan, maybe you can comment. I know McCormick has had at the forefront your work around kind of equity and inclusion. Can you talk a little bit about the particular need to serve underserved communities in this moment?
Yeah, I think we've probably for about 4-ish years, we've really been going on a racial equity journey to have that as one of our lenses when we're grant making, particularly in Chicago, in the Black and brown neighborhoods. And then not only that, with that as a lens, but around tables that are broadly funding, not just in the veteran space, bringing the veteran lens to them, and that recognizing that people are funding in the mental health space or funding in workforce development or funding, that veterans are part of our community and part of the population and sometimes might be adversely affected even more so because of their experience. So I think it's two-pronged, and how we try to approach it is not only with our own grant making, and particularly now looking at the organizations that are deep in neighborhoods and are serving the veteran population, but then on the bigger tables, making sure that veterans and military connected folks are part of the conversation when they're having these discussions about where to fund and where to point dollars.
Right. Just to jump in on that, Todd, if I could, I would say, this question around mental health, I think is a very interesting one. What we often see, in combat or on deployments, right, the ability for the service member to be able to contain a lot of their emotions, while they're continuing mission. And what we often will see, right, is the latency effect, and it's upon the redeployment, or especially that transition out, where there was so many challenges on the mental health front. I think we're going to see a lot of the same thing. I saw some interesting research coming out of an organization called Texas 2036 that's looking at the mental health for the state of Texas, and the forecasted increase around substance abuse and around suicide and so many other things that we all want to prevent. I think the tail of this is not 2020, it's 5, perhaps all the decade of the 2020s. And so I do think veterans and veteran organizations that have already been having conversations around PTSD and around mental health for so long. I mean, Starbucks is one of our big partners on this. They care deeply about mental health. And so getting more corporations to get behind that message, to look to veterans organizations to be able to say, hey, you've already had these conversations, you've already been working through these. I think veterans and veteran organizations can be leaders in this way in the months and the years ahead when it comes to the mental health challenges that millions of more Americans are going to face due to economic hardship, the isolation, right, the physical separation from people, but then also just my entire career field might now be shut down or changed. Right? There's so many stressors that are triggers for mental health that are already happening, but we're not sensing it right now. It's the latency effect that we've got to be concerned with in the fall of 2020 and into 21 and 22.
Mm-hmm. And then I just want to honor some of the comments that are coming in. Asif Hader, I believe is how you pronounce your name, is commenting about PTSD. And in fact, this is a traumatic state that we are, so many of us are living through. It is a state of trauma. And so technically defined, we're going to be in this post-traumatic state. And what can, to your point, Anne-Marie, what can the veteran community, maybe where can we lead and sort of share insights and perspectives? Tim Farrell, who leads NAVSO, a terrific organization that we are members of, acknowledge that diversification of funding, probably always a good idea, but arguably critical now as we look at potentially large scale events, galas and things like that kind of going away. I think the optimist in me says that there will be an additional scrutiny as to what's relevant today. And I think that's, Megan, you talked about that, foundation sort of getting reconnected, kind of skipping, process in some ways to kind of get immediate needs met. I think our organizations are trying to do the same thing. So those are maybe some positives coming out of this moment. Nick asked a question, are there more funded programs coming out specifically for veterans' economic survival during and after this COVID-19 pandemic? Are there things that you know of? Nick, I think asked another question about the stimulus checks and what are we hearing on the ground? That's an issue we're very close to. I'll speak to entrepreneurs and what they're seeing with the stimulus checks, and then I'd love a perspective that you all might have as to what does the government do differently going forward. I mean, what they currently fund, things like TAP, but what are they going to change their thinking about transition and support? On the stimulus piece, we know it's a mixed bag, and this actually gets to the equity piece. Those organizations with the capacity to understand how to sort of get those resources, and I think social capital is a big part of that, are getting those resources before those that lack the social capital. So it might sound like a small thing, but if you're required to send over a spreadsheet that reflects payroll for the last 12 months, there's a lot of small businesses that just don't have that. That's a threshold capacity that a lot of organizations don't have. So Nick, to the question of what are we hearing on the ground, it's a mixed bag for receipt of the PPP. We know that it ran out. It's opened again, the next tranche of money now. We put some resources on Bunker Labs for lenders that you can go to. If you didn't already have an established community banking relationship, that's tough. Banks aren't taking on new clients in this time. So again, it's a mixed bag, and I think disproportionately felt by underserved communities. But let me open back up to the panel. What do you think the government's going to do kind of differently as it relates to supporting veterans going forward out of this? Oh, Kathy, I think you're on mute.
That was, just to be safe.
We all do it several calls a day.
I think one of the things that's important to know is that there are a lot of organizations that will help you because you're a veteran, to make sure you're aware of them, from Operation Homefront, USAA, PenFed Foundation. If you're having personal financial problems with making rent or mortgage or, things like that, there's a lot of resources on our COVID-19 military support website. A lot of those are listed. And so don't feel shy about reaching out for help, because all of those exist for you. A lot of the service societies as well. So I think there's that for people who are, I don't know if any of your audience here is planning a transition out of the military. We've been working with all the military services so that they can allow people to stay their transitions if they feel this is not a good time to transition out. So I think that that's an important option for people to keep in mind as they're planning their future, not have to re-enlist or not have to create a new commitment to, but to just extend for some period of time. I do think that TAP is going to be leaning into longer and longer transition periods. And the VA as well is going to be looking at having more and more skill bridge and that kind of support. And I think that's going to be important, because keeping people economically viable is much better than having people who are needing government assistance.
Anne-Marie, do you want to pick up the thread on transition specifically, since that's sort of your wheelhouse and the government's reaction and support of it?
Yeah, we've seen even just on social media channels like LinkedIn, DOD, TAP reaching out to say, hey, which VSOs are serving you? Who's able to push through during these times where we can't meet? We've had a couple of component commands of SOCOM reach out to us about running some programming, because they're simply not allowed to convene. And so what I'd love to see coming out of this, and particularly if we're in a strained funding environment, how can we collaborate? How can Team Red, White, and Blue partner with the Commit Foundation more to ensure that Pursue Your Purpose is in the hands of all of their members? How can we ensure that a grant isn't being stroked to a foundation that normally doesn't do something when there's another organization that already does it really well? So, I'm hoping that DOD's inquiries, and of course, certainly the folks that are really leaning in and checking ego at the door are collaborating so that we can all push through this. And on the back end, reduce some of the duplicity of effort, reduce, some of the wasting of resources, and really be able to come out, at the end of the day, all of us want to have a better product for the men and women that are transitioning out of uniform into civilian lives so that they have purpose and they're happy. So I'm hoping that there is a greater collaboration, and that's certainly what we're looking for on our end.
Great. Other thoughts, Mike or Megan? What do you think that changes from the government standpoint and how we speak to sort of this military transition? Will we talk about it differently?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting from my view is how different, the average veteran is. When I founded Team Red, White, and Blue in 2010, the average men and women coming out, ETSing, retiring in 10, 11, 12, very different than those who are transitioning out today, right? Because of the information age, because of a lot of those men and women who had 2, 3 rotations in Iraq or Afghanistan, and today it's just a much lower number on that. So as I look at that, I see a pretty big delta in some regards to the veterans, and we've seen that play out in Team Red, White, and Blue as well. So I think that the question for me around transition evolves into how do we, so like what Commit's doing I think is awesome, like with the digital resources and the ability to connect with veterans, soon to be veterans, right, is huge, because a lot of them, frankly, a 22-year-old young sergeant ETSing is going to feel often more comfortable on a digital library looking through and picking and choosing what training they want to have than they would going to a seminar with other people that they don't know. And you can say that's a terrible thing or not, it doesn't matter. That's the reality. So for us, we don't see people like, oh, I'm gonna go join Team Red, White, and Blue. Where's that chapter run? Like that just doesn't happen anymore. It's, you download the app, you join the organization, you start to sense it out, you sniff it out. And so I think that government's got to continue to evaluate, and I hope they do more of this in foundations as well, as who's really kind of leaning forward and looking at and thinking about the changes in the veteran population, that is the 200,000 or so that are ETSing and retiring each year, and how we can better serve them, because there are generational differences. There are also experience differences based upon what your military service looked like.
Great. And someone asks, and maybe this will be one of our parting questions, but the question of, is it a good time to get out of the military, and what advice do you have? One of the things I'm curious about is how we rethink this notion of national service. We're seeing kind of healthcare workers and service workers, who are working $15 an hour jobs, celebrated as heroes for the work, for their ability to sort of show up and do the things that ensure that we have food on our tables and so forth. So I'm just curious for your all's perspective. Megan, maybe I'll start with you, but what do you say to somebody who's getting ready to get out of the military right now, and any thoughts you have there?
I think, it's going to be a tough environment to transition into. Obviously, we all know that. I want to say that because in the 5 years I've been at McCormick Foundation and directly working in the veteran space, it's a lot better network and resources and well connected in collaboration amongst the VSOs than it was certainly when I got out of the Navy. Like that didn't even exist, and it's because of organizations like the ones that are here today, that it's going to be a tough environment, but there are so many more resources now that are connected to each other, that and kind of not, I don't want to call it safety nets, but networks upon networks, and just to not be afraid to ask and reach out and get ahead of that. There's the Pathfinder program now that you can work with a year prior to separation. There's also there's the Skill Bridge programs, and that's just to name a few. So it's going to be a tough time, but I think the networks are so much stronger than they were 5-10 years ago.
Great. Mike, I'll go to you next for kind of your thoughts, maybe final advice or perspective for transitioning service members.
Yeah, I live right on the outsteps, the doorsteps of Fort Bragg. So, I'm talking to a lot of my friends who are in the considerations of, ETSing and retiring, all that kind of stuff. So, I think that, I definitely would agree. Like, it's definitely a tough time to transition in general. I think the point that I would highlight goes back to what AMC said, which is like, you got to start this stuff early. You got to start to begin the process. You can't feel bad about 18 months out, whether or not the military tells you like, you're authorized to or whatnot. I remember I studied for the GMAT and the GRE when I was, on my lunch breaks at 3rd SF group. So, when I was applying to grad school. So I think it's important that you really kind of take the transition seriously and you begin it as early as you can, whenever you decide it's going to be, because it's not going to happen overnight effectively. And at the end of the day, and, again, what Team Red, White, and Blue spends a lot of its time and energy on, certainly I see this out of, Commit Foundation with finding your purpose and, it's how do you envision the rest of your life? Do you believe that your best days are behind you or they're in front of you? And I think that, the joint messaging from the VSO community, I think wants to keep moving in that direction, that your best days are not behind you, they're in front of you. The military has prepared you for that. But right now, for sure, will be a difficult time to transition. But, if your retirement's coming up and your date's set, then, you're probably moving out at that time. And I think you can't be afraid of that. You got to have the confidence to be able to move forward.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. Kathy?
Hi, can I add on real quick right
Please.
there? Just 'cause he was talking about commit. I'd like to see the glass half full on this. We go through transitions as military service members, spouses, and families throughout our entire careers. We got this. We were talking to one of our fireside chat persons in the workshop last night. We talked about how humility and confidence can live in the same body. And, veterans understand human behavior greater than 95% of the population out there. And I think that there is going to be so much opportunity for leadership, decision makers, people that thrive in the midst of uncertain environments. And so we're really excited about the opportunity. We at Commit have extended the amount of time that we give people because we are realizing that they need more time for conversation right now. But I really do think that we're going to win this and weather it well.
Awesome. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Kathy?
I'm going to give a little bit of a different perspective and take it for what it's worth. I would not transition right now. My husband was going to transition in 2009, 2010. That was our original plan. We had done all the taps. We had planned to go. 2008, the biggest recession that there was, we stayed in longer. And when we compare ourselves to the folks our friends who did get out then, we feel very good about that choice. Right now, the military will not kick you out. There's guidance, even if it's your retirement date, that you can extend. Transition can be tough. So I encourage people to look at that option and to think through it seriously. There is guidance. You can see it on the CMSI website. There's also a great town hall that's posted that you can watch after the fact to see the pluses and minuses. If you feel it's right for you to transition, Anne-Marie and other organizations can help you be successful. By all means, do it. But our friends and family, I'm encouraging them to not make the transition at this time, for what it's worth. I'm not an expert, but that's my opinion.
And that's what we want, is opinions from people that we trust and respect, and diverse opinions, because we're having to sort of sort through and make choices that are right for our lives. I think the final thought I would offer is that I think people ask, is it a good time to start a business? I think you're going to see a rapid deceleration of businesses that weren't airtight and an acceleration of some that were. Mm-hmm. And it's in periods of disruption that opportunities also are created. And so as we look at localizing economies, as we look at disruption of sort of major players and our buying patterns as people, there's going to be opportunities. Not ignoring the perils and the hardships right now, but we want to keep folks optimistic that we're going to be on the other side of this. They came out of this with the Great Depression with the Roaring '20s, and so maybe we can be hopeful that there's something around the corner for us. So, I want to say a thank you to you, Mike, Kathy, Megan, and Anne-Marie for giving us your time. We've linked to all of your organizations and the fantastic resources that you are providing, and I just want to say thank you for your service to the military-connected community. Before COVID-19, but certainly now as well. So with that, I'll give it back to you, Liz.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Thank you all so much, panelists. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the entrepreneurs that attended this panel. I think, from the engagement and just from the encouragement, which we'll share with our panelists, just how helpful this was to a lot of our community members. So we are looking forward to seeing you next week for several of our events. They will be taking place in this same format with our Zoom webinar and simulcasting to Facebook Live. So we'll be posting about that later tomorrow, but we look forward to seeing all of you. Stay healthy, and remember, the door is always open. We're here for you. All in.
Thank you.
Awesome, guys.